Sometimes the deepest loneliness comes not from being alone, but from believing your time for love and family has passed. Helena had made peace with her empty house and childless years, teaching other women's sons while her own dreams gathered dust. She lived quietly in the mountain village, far from Rome's power and politics. At 42, the widowed schoolmistress had accepted that some chapters of life simply close forever. Then one spring morning, Emperor Gaior appeared at her door. His words were direct and startling. "I need an empress, and you need children." Helena stared at this powerful man who ruled an empire, but stood before her with surprising vulnerability. Could two lonely people truly find what they'd lost? Could a simple teacher become mother to a nation's future? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through the olive trees as Helena arranged her teaching scrolls on the rough wooden table. These precious documents, some borrowed from the village priest, others painstakingly copied by her own hand, represented her life's work. Each scroll bore the fingerprints of eager young minds, the occasional tear stain from a frustrated student, and the careful annotations she'd made to help farm boys understand letters and numbers their fathers never learned. Her modest stone cottage sat at the edge of Montanus, a mountain village 3 days' ride from the nearest Roman garrison. Here, among terraced vineyards and olive groves, she had built a quiet life from the ashes of her shattered dreams. The single room that served as her school held 12 wooden stools arranged in a semicircle, their surfaces worn smooth by countless students who had passed through her care over the past 15 years. Magistra Helena. Young Lucius burst through the doorway, his dark hair tousled from running up the mountain path. At 14, he was her brightest pupil, a shepherd's son with a mind that devoured knowledge like a starving man consumes bread. The baker's apprentice can't remember his multiplication tables again. Helena smiled, remembering another eager boy who had once struggled with numbers. Marcus had been 22 when they married, a soldier on leave who charmed her with his gentle patience and dreams of a farm in the countryside. He'd spent hours helping her organize these very scrolls, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle with the delicate papyrus. "Then we shall practice with honey cakes," she replied, gathering her materials. Numbers become friendlier when they involve something sweet. The memory of Marcus still brought warmth rather than pain, though it had taken years to reach that peace. They'd had barely 2 years together before the border skirmishes claimed him. 2 years filled with hope for children who never came. She'd been 27 then, still young enough to dream of remarrying, of filling a house with laughter and little feet. But the years had passed, and no suitable man had appeared in their small mountain community. The village widowers were decades older or decades younger, and the Roman soldiers who occasionally passed through sought entertainment, not wives. By 35, she'd stopped looking toward the door when footsteps approached. By 40, she'd given away the tiny clothes she'd optimistically sewn during her marriage. Now, at 42, she measured her days in lessons taught and minds shaped, finding purpose in nurturing intellects she could never call her own. "Magistra, are you well?" Lucius's voice brought her back to the present. He'd learned to read her moods with the intuition of a favorite student who'd spent years in her classroom. "Quite well, dear one. Shall we collect the others?" The morning proceeded as countless others had before. 7 boys between the ages of 8 and 15 gathered around her table, their faces scrubbed clean by mothers who understood the value of education even if they themselves could not read. She taught them letters first, tracing characters in sand-filled trays, then moved to numbers. Using stones and dried beans to make arithmetic tangible, old Miriam arrived at midday with fresh bread still warm from her ovens. The baker had been Helena's closest friend since Marcus's death, a woman whose own losses, 3 stillborn babies and a husband taken by plague, had forged a bond of shared sorrow that deepened into genuine affection. "The boys are getting taller," Miriam observed, watching Lucius help a younger student with his writing. Soon they'll be too big for those stools. Soon they'll be too old for lessons, Helena replied, accepting a still warm role. Their fathers need them in the fields and pastures. Education is a luxury most families can afford only for so long. You could teach girls too, you know. My granddaughter is cleverer than half those boys. Helena had considered it many times, but Roman tradition weighed heavily, even in their remote village. Girls learned domestic skills from their mothers, weaving, cooking, herb gathering. Formal education was deemed unnecessary, even potentially harmful to their marriage prospects. A woman who could read and cipher might develop ideas above her station. Perhaps someday, Helena said diplomatically. Though she doubted that day would come in her lifetime, Father Quintus joined them for the afternoon lessons, as he did twice weekly. The elderly priest brought stories of saints and martyrs, but also geography lessons from his travels as a young man, and philosophy simplified for young minds. His presence lent respectability to Helena's school. A single woman teaching boys required some ecclesiastical supervision. Even in their progressive mountain community. I've heard disturbing news from the capital, he murmured to Helena as the boys practiced their letters. The emperor remains unwed, and the Senate grows restless. There's talk of forcing a marriage to secure the succession. Helena nodded absently. Imperial politics seemed as distant as the moon. Emperor Gaior had ruled for 23 years with wisdom and strength, expanding the empire's borders while maintaining peace with neighboring kingdoms. His personal life was hardly her concern. She had lessons to plan and futures to shape. One struggling student at a time. The afternoon grew warm, and she moved the class outside under the spreading oak tree that had sheltered students for generations. Here, surrounded by the sounds of village life, chickens scratching in nearby yards, the rhythmic pounding of grain from the miller's wheel, children too young for school playing with wooden toys, she felt most at peace. Magistra, what's that dust cloud on the road? Marcus, the youngest at 8 years old, pointed toward the mountain path that led to their village. Helena shaded her eyes, squinting at the distant movement. Travelers were rare on the steep mountain roads, especially those that seemed to involve multiple horses. Merchants usually came singly or in pairs, and soldiers traveled these paths only when pursuing bandits or collecting taxes. Likely traders from the valley, she said, though something about the organized formation suggested otherwise. Let's return to our lesson. But concentration proved impossible as the dust cloud drew nearer. Other villagers had noticed too. Women emerged from doorways, men paused in their work, and children climbed onto rooftops for better views. The approaching party moved with military precision, banners flying, armor glinting in the afternoon sun. That's the imperial standard, Father Quintus breathed, his weathered face pale with shock. The golden eagle, I'd know it anywhere. Helena's heart began to pound, though she couldn't say why. What business could the emperor possibly have in their remote village? They paid their taxes faithfully, harbored no rebels, and lived quietly under Roman law. Perhaps he was simply passing through on his way to inspect the border fortifications. The schoolboys abandoned any pretense of studying, craning their necks for better views as the imperial entourage entered the village square. Helena counted 20 horses, half carrying soldiers in gleaming mail, the others bearing what appeared to be court officials in fine robes. At their head rode a figure she recognized from coins, but had never expected to see in flesh, Emperor Gaior himself. He was younger than she'd imagined, perhaps 5 years her senior, with graying temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of hard decisions and sleepless nights. Even dusty from travel, he carried himself with unmistakable authority. But it was something else that caught her attention, a weariness that seemed to go bone deep, the look of a man who bore great responsibilities and felt their weight. The emperor's gaze swept the village square, taking in the simple stone houses, the ancient well, the chickens pecking in the dust. His eyes paused on her little school group beneath the oak tree, lingering on Helena herself with an intensity that made her suddenly conscious of her simple brown dress and practical leather sandals. "Citizens of Montanus," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the square. "I come not as conqueror, but as a traveler seeking rest and counsel. Might I impose upon your hospitality for the night?" The village headman, old Cassius, stumbled forward and dropped to one knee. "Your Majesty honors us beyond measure. My humble house is yours, though I fear it's hardly suitable for—" "A roof and clean straw are luxury enough for a soldier," Gaior interrupted gently, dismounting with fluid grace. "I've slept on harder ground than your mountain provides." Helena found herself studying his face as he spoke with the villagers. There was kindness there, genuine interest in these simple people whose lives would never intersect with imperial politics. When a small child darted forward to touch his horse, Gaior smiled and lifted the boy onto the saddle, letting him feel like a conquering hero for a moment. This was not the distant marble figure from temple statues. This was a man who noticed details, who remembered what it felt like to be ordinary. Helena felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. How lonely it must be to rule an empire with no one to share the burden, no children to carry on the work, no partner to offer counsel in the quiet hours of the night. Their eyes met across the dusty square, and Helena felt the world shift slightly on its axis. The emperor was looking at her not with the casual glance of a ruler surveying his subjects, but with the focused attention of a man recognizing something he'd been seeking without knowing it. Father Quintus touched her elbow. "Come, my child. We should welcome our unexpected guest properly." But Helena remained frozen beneath the oak tree, surrounded by her precious scrolls and her wide-eyed students, feeling as though her carefully ordered life had just cracked open like an egg. Tomorrow would bring changes she couldn't yet imagine, but tonight the mountain village of Montanus would host an emperor who might just be as lonely as the woman who taught other people's children and dreamed of impossible things. Helena barely slept that night. The knowledge that Emperor Gaior lay beneath a roof barely 200 paces from her own cottage made rest impossible. She rose before dawn, as was her custom, and tried to lose herself in preparing the day's lessons. But her hands trembled as she unrolled the scrolls, and her mind wandered to questions that had no answers. Why had he come to their remote village? What could possibly draw the ruler of the known world to a place where the most exciting event was usually the arrival of the seasonal tax collector? She told herself it was mere coincidence. Perhaps he was inspecting border defenses, or seeking a quiet place to rest between more important destinations. The soft knock at her door came just as she was lighting the oil lamp for her morning prayers. Helena's heart hammered against her ribs as she approached the wooden portal. Knowing with strange certainty who stood on the other side, Emperor Gaior waited alone in the pre-dawn darkness. No guards or attendants visible. He'd exchanged his imperial robes for simple traveler's clothes, brown wool tunic and dark cloak, but authority clung to him like morning mist. His eyes held the same weariness she'd noticed yesterday, but something else too. Hope, perhaps, or determination. "Your Majesty," she managed, dropping into an awkward curtsy. "Just Gaior, please. May I enter? What I have to say requires privacy." Helena stepped aside, acutely aware of her cottage's humble furnishings, the single table that served for meals and lessons, the narrow bed in the alcove, the cooking hearth with its collection of simple pottery. Scrolls lay scattered across every surface, testament to her life's work. Gaior examined the room with the same careful attention he'd shown the village square. His gaze lingered on the teaching materials, the small shrine to household gods, the carefully mended clothes hanging from wooden pegs. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "I came here seeking you specifically, Helena of Montanus." The words struck her like a physical blow. "I don't understand, Your Majesty. I'm no one of importance. Just a village teacher. Surely there's been some mistake?" "No mistake." He moved to her table, touching one of the scrolls with surprising gentleness. "Tell me about your students." "My students?" The unexpected question threw her off balance. "They're good boys, hard-working. Lucius has real promise. He could serve in a governor's house someday, if given the chance. Young Marcus struggles with letters but excels with numbers. Their families sacrificed to give them education, hoping for better futures than farming can provide. And you love them. It wasn't a question. Helena felt heat rise in her cheeks. I care for their welfare, certainly. Any teacher would. Any teacher would not spend her own coin on extra scrolls or invite struggling students for additional lessons without payment. Any teacher would not keep detailed notes on each child's progress or write letters of recommendation to administrators in distant cities. Gaior's eyes found hers. I've made inquiries, Helena. Your reputation extends far beyond this mountain. Fear crept into her voice. Have I done something wrong? The boys' families consent to their education. You've done everything right. That's precisely why I'm here. Gaior drew a folded document from his cloak, parchment so fine it seemed to glow in the lamplight. This is a marriage contract, Helena. I'm asking you to be my wife. The world tilted. Helena gripped the table's edge to keep from falling, her vision tunneling to the impossible document in his hands. Your wife? But you're the emperor. I'm nobody. A village widow who teaches farmers' children. This is madness, is it? Gaior set the contract on the table between them. I need an empress who understands the common people's struggles, who can guide our policies with wisdom born of genuine experience. The empire needs a mother, someone who can nurture its future as carefully as you've nurtured these village boys. And I need children, Helena whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. Yes, his voice gentled. We could help each other, Helena. I offer you a chance at motherhood, at a family you believed lost forever. In return, you could help me build an empire worthy of the children we might raise together. Helena's legs gave way, and she sank onto the wooden stool beside her table. The marriage contract lay within reach, its imperial seal catching the lamplight like a trapped star. Why me? There must be hundreds of suitable women in Rome, senators' daughters, wealthy merchants' widows, foreign princesses seeking alliance, political marriages. Gaior's voice carried bitter experience. I've considered them all. Women who see the crown, not the man. Who would bear heirs out of duty, not love. Who could never understand why I lose sleep over grain shortages in distant provinces, or worry about whether a tax collector might be too harsh with struggling farmers. He knelt beside her stool, bringing their eyes level. Yesterday, watching you teach those boys, I saw something I'd given up hoping to find. Patience, genuine care, the ability to see potential where others see only problems. You guided that young shepherd through a difficult passage, not because you had to, but because his success mattered to you personally. Helena's hands shook as she touched the contract. I loved my first husband deeply, Your Majesty. I don't know if I could. I'm not asking for love, Helena. Not immediately. I'm asking for partnership, for the chance to build something meaningful together. Love, if it comes, would be a gift. But respect, mutual support, shared purpose, these we could have from the beginning. Tears blurred her vision as 20 years of buried dreams suddenly stirred to life. Children, a family, the chance to matter in ways she'd never dared imagine. But the cost, leaving everything familiar, entering a world of politics and intrigue, becoming a figure of public scrutiny. The boys need their teacher, she said weakly. The empire needs their teacher more. Helena, I've ruled for 23 years without an heir. The Senate grows restless. If I die without sons, civil war becomes likely. Thousands would suffer. But more than that, I'm tired of carrying this burden alone. I need someone who sees beyond the throne to the man beneath. Helena rose on unsteady legs and walked to the window, gazing out at the village where she'd built her life from grief's ashes. The sun was rising over the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. In a few hours, her students would arrive for their daily lessons. Life would continue its familiar rhythm, unless she chose otherwise. If I agreed, and I'm not saying I will, what would become of my school? My students? We would ensure the school continues with a qualified replacement. Your star pupil, Lucius, could receive advanced education in Rome, perhaps return someday as a master teacher himself. The village would be granted special tax considerations, roads improved, a proper aqueduct built. You would do all that? I would do it gladly, Helena. These people shaped the woman I hope to marry. They deserve recognition for that gift. Helena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of decision settling on her shoulders like a mantle. How many nights had she lain awake wondering if she'd wasted her life, if her childless years had any meaning beyond the small good she did for other people's children. Now the impossible was being offered, the chance to matter on a scale she'd never dreamed, to build a legacy that could outlast her lifetime. But the fear remained. Fear of inadequacy, of failing at something so monumentally important. Fear of losing herself in a world she didn't understand. I need time to think, she whispered. It's everything I've ever wanted and everything I've ever feared, all bound together. Of course. Gaior rose but left the contract on her table. I'll remain in the village today. Tonight, if you're willing, we could speak again. At the door he paused. Helena, I know this seems impossible. A fairy tale too strange to be real. But sometimes the impossible is exactly what's needed. Sometimes a village teacher is precisely what an empire requires. After he left, Helena remained by the window as dawn broke fully over the mountains. The marriage contract seemed to pulse with possibility on her humble table, a doorway to a future she'd never allowed herself to imagine. In a few hours, she would need to decide whether to step through it or close it forever. Helena spent the morning in a daze, mechanically conducting lessons while her mind churned through impossible possibilities. Her students noticed her distraction. Lucius asked twice if she felt unwell, and young Marcus had to repeat his recitation 3 times before she truly heard him. The marriage contract seemed to burn through the wooden table where she'd hidden it beneath her teaching scrolls, its presence transforming her familiar cottage into foreign territory. When old Miriam arrived at midday with fresh bread and curious eyes, Helena found herself grateful for the interruption. You look terrible. A child, Miriam said without preamble, settling her bulk onto the spare stool. Pale as milk and shaky as a newborn lamb. What's wrong? Helena dismissed the boys early, watching them race down the mountain path with the carefree energy she envied. How simple life seemed when your biggest concern was mastering multiplication tables or impressing your teacher with neat penmanship. Miriam, she began carefully, what would you say if someone offered you everything you'd ever wanted? But taking it meant leaving behind everything you knew. The older woman's shrewd eyes narrowed. I'd say that sounds like a question with teeth in it. What's really troubling you, Helena? There was no point in dissembling. Miriam had known her too long and too well. Helena retrieved the marriage contract from beneath her scrolls, watching her friend's weathered face as she examined the imperial seal. Sweet Mary and all the saints, Miriam breathed, her hands trembling as she held the document. This is real. The Emperor wants to marry you? So it seems. Helena sank onto her stool, suddenly exhausted. He says I understand the common people, that I could help guide imperial policy. He needs an empress who can bear him children, and you need children more than you need air to breathe, Miriam finished gently. Oh, my dear girl, how long have you carried this burden alone? Helena's careful composure cracked. Since Marcus died, I've told myself that teaching was enough, that nurturing other people's children could fill the emptiness. But it's a lie, Miriam. Every night I go to sleep in this cottage, where we plan to raise our family, surrounded by reminders of dreams that died with him. I'm 42 years old. If I don't take this chance, there may never be another, Miriam agreed. She studied the contract with surprising literacy. Few women in their village could read, but the baker's widow had always been exceptional. The terms are generous. He's offering protection for the village, education for your students, and... She paused, eyebrows rising. Helena, this clause here, he's willing to let you continue teaching even as Empress. Could you imagine it? Me, in the imperial palace, trying to navigate court politics and noble intrigues. I wouldn't last a week before making some terrible mistake that embarrassed us both. You underestimate yourself, Miriam said firmly. You've been managing village politics for 15 years, mediating between families, convincing fathers to spare their sons for education, negotiating with tax collectors for reasonable assessments. Politics is politics, whether it involves farmers' disputes or senators' ambitions. Helena laughed bitterly. Hardly the same scale, my friend. No, but the same skills. Reading people, understanding motivations, finding common ground. Miriam set the contract aside and took Helena's hands in her work-roughened ones. Tell me truly, what frightens you most about this proposal? Helena was quiet for a long moment, searching her heart for honesty. Failing him. Failing myself. I've built such a small, safe life here, Miriam. I know exactly what's expected of me, how to succeed, who I am. As Empress, I'd be starting completely over. What if I'm not strong enough? What if the loneliness of imperial life proves worse than the loneliness of widowhood? And what if it proves better? What if you discover strengths you never knew you possessed? Miriam squeezed her hands. Helena, I've watched you nurture 3 generations of village children. I've seen you stand up to pompous officials and greedy merchants. I've watched you build something beautiful from the ashes of your grief. If anyone could succeed at this impossible thing, it's you. But the children here will survive without you, as children always do. But the Empire's children, current and future, they need someone like you making decisions that affect their lives. How many families could you help with imperial resources instead of just the handful in our small village? The afternoon brought Father Quintus, who took the news with surprising calm. The elderly priest examined the marriage contract with the same scholarly attention he brought to theological debates, occasionally murmuring approval at particular clauses. Remarkable, he said finally. This agreement reads more like a partnership than a traditional marriage contract. He's offering you genuine authority, not just ceremonial status. You think I should accept? Helena asked. I think you should pray for guidance, as you always do when facing difficult decisions. But Helena, he leaned forward, his kind eyes serious. Sometimes God places opportunities before us that seem impossible precisely because they require faith to grasp them. Perhaps your years of patient service were preparation for something larger than we could imagine. Or perhaps I'm deluding myself into thinking I could matter on such a scale. You've already mattered. Child, every boy you've educated carries part of you into the world. But this opportunity could amplify that influence 1,000-fold. The question isn't whether you're worthy. It's whether you're willing to trust in the path that's opened before you. That evening, as twilight painted the mountains purple and gold, Helena walked the familiar paths of her village one more time. She paused at the little cemetery where Marcus lay beneath a simple stone marker, his grave carpeted with wildflowers she'd planted years ago. What should I do? She whispered to the gathering darkness. You always knew the right course when we faced difficult choices together. I'm lost without your counsel. The evening breeze stirred the wildflowers, carrying the scent of jasmine and mountain herbs. For just a moment, Helena could almost feel Marcus beside her, not the young soldier who died too soon, but the man he might have become, wise with years and experience. She could almost hear his voice telling her what she already knew in her heart. Some chances came only once in a lifetime. Some doorways, once closed, never opened again. When Emperor Gaior knocked at her door that night, Helena met him with steady hands and clear eyes. The marriage contract lay on her table beside a simple gold band, her wedding ring from Marcus, which she'd worn faithfully for 15 years. I have questions, she said without preamble, about what would be expected of me, about how we would manage the practical aspects of governing together, about what happens if this arrangement fails to produce the heirs you need. Ask whatever you wish. Full partnership requires complete honesty. Helena drew a deep breath, feeling the weight of decision settling finally into place. And I have one condition of my own to add to your generous terms. Something that must be written into the contract before I sign. Name it. She touched the simple wedding band on her finger, then slipped it off for the first time since Marcus's death. If we do this, if we build a life together, I want your promise that our marriage will be real. Not just political convenience, but genuine partnership. I won't share a bed with someone who sees me as merely useful. I've known love once, Your Majesty. I won't accept less than the possibility of finding it again. Gaior's tired face transformed with something that might have been relief. When he smiled, Helena glimpsed the man beneath the imperial burden, someone who'd been as lonely as she, who'd hoped for connection while expecting only duty. That, he said quietly, is exactly what I was hoping you'd ask. The journey to Rome began 3 days later, after a wedding ceremony that would be remembered in Montanus for generations. Helena had insisted on simplicity, no elaborate feast the village couldn't afford, no pretentious displays that would embarrass her humble neighbors. Instead, Father Quintus performed the ceremony in the ancient stone church, with the entire village crowded into the small space and spilling out into the courtyard. Gaior had surprised everyone by wearing not imperial regalia, but the simple white tunic of a Roman citizen. When he slipped Helena's new wedding ring onto her finger, a band of gold so pure it seemed to glow within a light, his hands were steady, his voice clear and warm as he spoke the traditional vows. Helena's voice trembled only slightly as she promised to honor and support him, but her eyes never left his face. The ring was beautiful but understated, lacking the elaborate gems and precious stones Helena had expected. When she commented on this to Gaior during their wedding dinner, he smiled with genuine pleasure. "I'm glad you approve. I had it made by the finest goldsmith in Rome, but I asked for elegance rather than ostentation. A teacher's ring, not a politician's." Now, as their traveling party wound down mountain paths toward the great roads that led to Rome, Helena twisted the ring nervously on her finger. The familiar weight of her old wedding band was gone. She'd placed it carefully in Marcus's tomb before leaving Montanus, but this new symbol felt strange and wonderful. Gaior rode beside her, matching his mount's pace to her smaller mare's comfortable gait. He'd proven surprisingly attentive to her needs during the journey's first day, ensuring she had cushions for the hard saddle, stopping frequently for rest, and patiently answering her countless questions about what awaited them in Rome. "Tell me about your advisors," Helena said, as they descended into a valley green with spring grain. "Who will I need to understand first?" "General Marcus Aurelius, no relation to your late husband, commands my personal guard and serves as military advisor. He's honest, direct, and completely loyal. You'll like him." Gaior guided his horse around a patch of loose stones. "Senator Lucius Brutus leads the largest faction in the Senate. He's intelligent, ambitious, and has made no secret of his disapproval regarding our marriage." Helena's stomach clenched. "Because of my background?" "Because he'd hoped to arrange a marriage between me and his own daughter. Political alliance, substantial dowry, connections to powerful families." Gaior's voice remained carefully neutral. "Senator Brutus doesn't approve of rulers who make personal choices based on personal reasons." "And the other senators? Do they share his feelings?" "Some do. Others are simply curious. They've heard rumors about the village teacher who caught their emperor's eye, but they're reserving judgment until they meet you." He turned in his saddle to face her fully. "Helena, I won't lie to you. Court life will be challenging. There are protocols to learn, relationships to navigate, people who will test your resolve. But remember, I didn't choose you despite your background. I chose you because of it." They made camp that evening beside a clear stream, the imperial guards efficiently establishing a secure perimeter, while servants prepared a simple but elegant meal. Helena found herself missing the familiar sounds of her village: chickens settling for the night, the distant lowing of cattle, children's voices calling across cottage yards. "Regrets?" Gaior asked, settling beside her on a fallen log as they watched the sun set behind distant hills. "Nervousness," she admitted. "This morning I woke up in the cottage where I've lived for 15 years. Tonight I'm sleeping in a tent, traveling toward a life I can barely imagine. It feels like a dream that might dissolve if I examine it too closely." "I understand. When I first became emperor, I spent months expecting someone to appear and inform me there'd been a mistake. That surely they meant someone else, someone more prepared, more worthy of the responsibility. Helena looked at him with surprise. The confident ruler who'd appeared at her cottage had seemed born to command, utterly certain of his authority and place in the world. You felt inadequate. But you've ruled successfully for over 20 years. I've learned to rule successfully. But in the beginning, Gaior stirred the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkening sky. I was terrified every day, terrified of making decisions that would affect millions of lives, terrified of proving unworthy of the trust placed in me. The fear never completely disappears, Helena. It just becomes manageable as you gain experience and confidence. And if I make terrible mistakes, if I embarrass you before important people or give offense without meaning to, then we'll handle it together. You'll learn as I did, as everyone does who finds themselves in positions they never expected to hold. He reached over and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her new wedding ring. Helena, do you know why I really chose you? She shook her head, not trusting her voice. Because when you speak about your students, your whole face changes. You light up with genuine love and concern for their welfare. Because when that young boy couldn't master his multiplication tables, you didn't grow impatient. You found honey cakes to make the lesson engaging. Because you see people as individuals, not as masses to be managed. His grip on her hand tightened slightly. The empire needs someone who remembers that policies affect real families, real children. Someone who understands that every decision we make in the palace echoes through countless lives in countless villages. I've had advisors who could recite population statistics and tax revenues, but you're the first person I've met who could tell me what those numbers actually mean to the people behind them. Helena felt warmth spreading through her chest. Not the nervous flutter of attraction, but something deeper and more stable. Recognition, perhaps. The understanding that they truly could complement each other, that her strengths might balance his weaknesses as his experience could guide her inexperience. What happens when we reach Rome? She asked. First, you'll meet the household staff. They're good people, most of them. Then we'll begin the formal presentations. A few key senators and their wives, the major court officials, military commanders. Nothing overwhelming at first. We'll ease you into imperial life gradually. And after that, Gaior smiled, and Helena caught a glimpse of mischief in his eyes that made him look younger. After that, my dear wife, we begin the interesting work of reforming an empire. I have some ideas about educational policy that I think might appeal to a certain village teacher. That night, in her own tent, with guards posted respectfully outside, Helena lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of an imperial camp. But as she drifted towards sleep, her hand found the simple pouch she'd sewn into her traveling dress, a pouch containing seeds from her garden in Montanus. Cherry blossoms, mountain herbs, wildflowers that had grown outside her cottage window. Tomorrow would bring another step toward her new life, but she carried pieces of her old one with her. Perhaps, in time, she could plant them in Roman soil and watch them bloom in palace gardens. Rome overwhelmed Helena's senses from the moment they crested the final hill and saw the city sprawling before them like a marble dream. The eternal city stretched beyond the horizon, its temples and forums gleaming white in the afternoon sun, the Colosseum rising like a stone mountain, aqueducts marching across the landscape with geometric precision. The noise hit her next, thousands of voices creating a constant hum that never quite resolved into individual words. Cartwheels grinding on stone streets, merchants hawking their wares in a dozen languages. It's magnificent, she breathed, unconsciously gripping Gaior's arm as their horses picked their way down the crowded avenue leading to the palace district. And terrifying, he replied with understanding. I still remember my first sight of Rome as a young officer. I was convinced I'd be swallowed up and lost forever. The imperial palace complex proved even more imposing than the city itself. Marble columns soared overhead. Mosaics depicted scenes of conquest and glory. And everywhere Helena looked, she saw luxury beyond her village imagination. Silk tapestries, gold inlays, bronze statues that seemed ready to step down from their pedestals and walk among the living. General Marcus Aurelius met them in the main courtyard. A weathered man of perhaps 50, with the bearing of someone who'd spent his life making difficult decisions. His greeting to Gaior was warm but respectful, and when he turned to Helena, she saw curiosity rather than judgment in his grey eyes. "Empress Helena," he said with a formal bow that somehow managed to convey genuine welcome. "The palace has been eager to meet the woman who captured our emperor's heart." "I hope I don't disappoint them," Helena replied, then immediately winced at how provincial she sounded. "Impossible," Aurelius said with a slight smile. "Anyone who could convince this stubborn ruler to finally marry deserves our gratitude." The household staff proved as welcoming as Gaior had promised. Helena met the head cook, an enormous woman named Claudia, who immediately began planning meals suited to a real person's appetite, instead of these court peacocks who eat like birds. The palace steward, a dignified older man called Silvanus, gave her a tour that lasted 3 hours and left her head spinning with information about protocols, schedules, and the bewildering array of servants whose job was apparently to ensure she never had to perform any task for herself. But it was the meeting with the court physician, Hippocrates, that changed everything. Dr. Hippocrates was younger than Helena had expected, perhaps 40, with intelligent dark eyes and the gentle manner of someone accustomed to delivering both good news and bad. He examined Helena with professional thoroughness before delivering his assessment. "You're in excellent health, Empress. Strong constitution, good bone structure. With proper care and the blessing of the gods, there's no reason you shouldn't bear healthy children." Helena's heart hammered against her ribs. After 15 years of believing motherhood had passed her by, hearing a physician speak of pregnancy as a realistic possibility felt like stepping into bright sunlight after years in shadow. "However," Hippocrates continued, reaching into his medical bag, "given your age, we should take every precaution to ensure the best possible outcome." He withdrew a small object wrapped in silk, an amulet carved from what appeared to be ancient ivory, depicting a woman with a child at her breast. "This fertility charm has been in the imperial collection for generations. Empress Livia wore it when she bore Augustus his heirs." Helena accepted the amulet with trembling hands. The ivory was smooth from centuries of handling, warm to the touch, and somehow comforting in its solid weight. Whether it held any actual power or simply represented hope made tangible, she couldn't say. But wearing it made her feel connected to all the women who'd come before her, who'd faced the challenge of creating new life in an uncertain world. "Thank you," she whispered, slipping the cord over her head so the amulet rested against her heart. That evening, as she and Gaior shared their first meal in the imperial dining room, Helena found herself studying her husband's face by candlelight. 3 weeks of marriage had begun to reveal the man beneath the imperial facade, someone who worried more than he showed, who carried the weight of millions of lives on shoulders that sometimes sagged with exhaustion when he thought no one was watching. "Tell me about the Senate," she said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "What should I expect when you present me formally?" Gaior set down his wine cup, his expression growing serious. "Most will be polite, at least initially. Curiosity will outweigh disapproval for the first few encounters. But Helena," he reached across the table to take her hand, "there will be challenges. Senator Brutus has been building opposition since news of our marriage reached Rome. He questions whether someone of humble birth can understand the complexities of governing an empire." "Perhaps he has a point," Helena said quietly. "I've been here one day, and I'm already overwhelmed by the protocols and expectations. How can I possibly provide meaningful counsel on matters I don't understand?" "By doing exactly what you did in your village classroom. By asking questions, listening carefully to the answers, and remembering that behind every policy decision are real people whose lives will be affected." Gaior's thumb traced across her knuckles. Helena, do you know what the Senate discussed most recently? Whether to increase grain subsidies for the urban poor. The debate centered entirely on costs and logistics, how much grain, from which provinces, at what expense to the treasury. And not one senator asked whether the current subsidies actually feed families adequately, or what happens to children whose parents can't work because they're weakened by hunger. Not one considered whether our policies might be creating dependency rather than opportunity. His eyes met hers. Those are the questions you would ask. Those are the perspectives the empire needs. Helena felt a flutter in her stomach, not the nervous anxiety that had plagued her for days, but something else. The first stirrings of possibility, perhaps even pregnancy. Dr. Hippocrates had examined her thoroughly and pronounced her fertile. The ancient amulet rested warm against her skin, connecting her to generations of imperial mothers. Gaior, she said hesitantly, what if we started a family sooner rather than later? I know we agreed to let love develop naturally, but you're 42, and we both know that every month matters, he finished gently. Helena, I've been hoping you'd broach this subject. I want children with you, not just for political reasons, but because I can already imagine the kind of mother you'd be. Patient, wise, devoted to their welfare above all else. That night, for the first time since their marriage, they shared not just a bed, but genuine intimacy. Helena fell asleep with Gaior's arm around her, the fertility amulet warm between them, and dreamed of children with his steady eyes and her patient heart. 6 months into her marriage, Helena knew with quiet certainty that she carried Gaior's child. The familiar signs, the morning sickness that sent her rushing from state dinners, the exhaustion that made her afternoon lessons with the servants' children feel monumental, the tender sensitivity that made even silk garments uncomfortable, all spoke of new life growing within her. She was reading to a group of palace children in the garden when old Miriam and Father Quintus arrived unannounced, their faces dusty from the long journey but glowing with excitement. Helena dropped her scroll and ran to embrace them, tears streaming down her cheeks as the familiar sense of home, mountain herbs and fresh bread enveloped her. Look at you, Miriam said, holding Helena at arm's length and studying her face with a baker's shrewd eye for details. Pale and tired and absolutely radiant. How far along are you, child? Helena laughed, pressing a hand to her still flat belly. Dr. Hippocrates confirmed it yesterday. 3 months, he believes. I haven't told Gaior yet. I wanted to be absolutely certain. Father Quintus made the sign of the cross, his weathered face creasing with joy. Blessed Mary be praised. The whole village has been praying for this news since you left us. They had come bearing gifts, a collection of items that made Helena's throat tight with emotion. Young Lucius had sent his finest piece of writing, a poem about Rome that showed remarkable improvement in both penmanship and composition. Several of her former students had contributed coins for a proper offering at the temple. And most precious of all, the village women had created something extraordinary. Miriam unfolded the embroidered baby blanket with reverent care, and Helena gasped at its beauty. Every woman in Montanus had contributed something. A few stitches, a small motif, a blessing worked into the fabric with thread and love. The result was a tapestry of their mountain life. Olive trees and vineyard terraces, the little stone church, even her old schoolhouse with its weathered oak tree. In the center, worked in gold thread, were the imperial eagles, but surrounded by mountain wildflowers and cherry blossoms that made the symbols of power seem gentle and approachable. It's magnificent, Helena whispered, running her fingers over the intricate needlework. How long did this take? We started the day news of your marriage reached the village, Miriam replied. Every woman worked on it during the harvest season. Even the young girls added stitches, though we had to redo some of their more enthusiastic contributions. Helena held the blanket against her chest, breathing in the faint scent of mountain lavender that still clung to the wool. This gift bridged her old life and new in ways she hadn't known she needed. Her child would sleep beneath images of the village where its mother had learned to love. wrapped in the hopes and prayers of people who would probably never see Rome, but who had gladly given their best for an imperial baby they would claim as their own. That evening, she waited until she and Gaior were alone in their private chambers before sharing both the blanket and her news. His reaction to the pregnancy was everything she could have hoped. Joy, so pure, it transformed his usually serious features. Gentle hands that trembled slightly as he touched her belly, and words of gratitude that brought tears to both their eyes. But it was his response to the village women's gift that truly moved her. Gaior examined every inch of the embroidered blanket with the careful attention he brought to important state documents, asking about specific motifs and the women who had created them. When Helena explained how the entire village had contributed, he was quiet for a long moment. "We must do something for them," he said finally. "These women have given our child a treasure beyond price. They deserve recognition for their generosity. What did you have in mind?" "Tax relief, certainly. Improved roads. That mountain path is treacherous in winter. And perhaps we could establish a proper school with multiple teachers and resources your single classroom never had." He looked up from the blanket, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Helena, what if we made Montanus a model village? Demonstration of what Roman governance can achieve when it focuses on people's actual needs rather than political abstractions?" Helena felt her heart swell with love for this man who understood that grand gestures meant less than practical improvements. The village would treasure such attention. "But Gaior, won't this seem like favoritism to your political opponents?" His expression darkened slightly. "Senator Brutus has already made his feelings clear about our marriage and its implications. Yesterday, he questioned whether a woman of humble origins could possibly understand the complexities of imperial succession. Apparently, he's concerned that our child might be too influenced by peasant values to rule effectively." Helena's hand instinctively moved to protect her belly. "He said that? About our unborn child?" "Among other things. He's been building a faction of senators who question whether our marriage serves the empire's best interests." Gaior's voice carried a dangerous edge. "I've tolerated his opposition as legitimate political discourse, but attacking my family crosses a line. What will you do?" "Continue governing well and let our results speak for themselves." Senator Brutus represents the old ways of thinking, that birth matters more than character, that tradition matters more than effectiveness. But Helena, our child will be living proof that strength can come from unexpected sources. The next morning brought their first public appearance since Helena's pregnancy became visible. The formal presentation to the Senate's wives was a carefully choreographed affair, held in the palace's most impressive reception hall. Helena wore her finest stola, deep blue silk that complemented her eyes, and the fertility amulet tucked discreetly beneath the fabric, its familiar weight providing comfort. The senatorial wives ranged from genuinely welcoming to coolly polite, but Helena found herself adapting to their different personalities with skills honed in her village classroom. Lady Cassia, whose husband led the Treasury Committee, proved genuinely interested in Helena's educational background and asked thoughtful questions about teaching methods. Lady Octavia, wife of the military commander, shared stories about raising sons in a political household that Helena filed away for future reference. But it was Senator Brutus's wife, Lady Portia, who provided the most memorable encounter. A woman of Helena's age, but hardened by years of political maneuvering, she approached with a smile that never reached her eyes. "How refreshing to meet someone with such unique qualifications for imperial life," she said, her tone suggesting the opposite. "I'm sure your village experience will prove invaluable in understanding the common people's concerns." "I hope so," Helena replied evenly. "The empire's strength comes from all its citizens, not just those born to privilege." "Indeed. Though one does wonder whether someone unaccustomed to the responsibilities of high position might find the pressures overwhelming. The burden of producing strong heirs, for instance, so much more complex than teaching village children basic letters." Helena felt heat rise in her cheeks, but managed to keep her voice steady. Every child deserves the same care and attention, whether they're destined for the throne or the plough. I've found that love and patience work equally well with imperial heirs and farmers' sons. Lady Portia's smile became even more artificial. How wonderfully naive. I do hope reality doesn't disappoint you too severely. My dear, as the woman glided away to torment some other target, Helena realized she'd just experienced her first taste of the political warfare that apparently passed for social interaction among Rome's elite. But instead of feeling intimidated, she found herself oddly energized. If this was the worst Lady Portia could offer, Helena could certainly handle it. That night, as she and Gaior reviewed the day's events, Helena felt the baby move for the first time, a flutter so slight she almost missed it. She pressed both hands to her belly, marveling at this tangible proof of the new life they'd created together. "Strong already," Gaior murmured, his hand covering hers. Like its mother, Helena had reached her 8th month of pregnancy when the world shattered around her. The spring festival of Minerva was in full swing, the palace gardens alive with music and celebration, when General Aurelius appeared at her side with grim urgency written across his weathered features. "Empress, I need you to come with me immediately," he said in low tones that cut through the festive noise. "There's been a development that requires your attention." Helena followed him through marble corridors to Gaior's private study, her swollen belly making swift movement awkward. She found her husband standing behind his desk, his face pale with shock, holding a piece of parchment as if it contained poison. Senator Brutus stood nearby with barely concealed satisfaction, flanked by 2 other senators Helena didn't recognize. "What's happened?" she asked, alarm rising in her throat like bile. Gaior's eyes met hers with an expression she'd never seen before. Doubt. Terrible, devastating doubt that made her knees weak. "Helena, I need you to explain something to me. This letter, it claims you were already married when I found you in Montanus. Married to a man named Castor, a stonemason who allegedly worked in your village for several years." The words hit her like a physical blow. Helena gripped the back of a chair for support, her mind reeling. "That's impossible. You know I was widowed. Marcus died in the border wars 15 years ago. There's never been anyone else. Yet this document, sworn before witnesses and sealed by a notary, claims otherwise," Senator Brutus interjected smoothly. "It alleges that you contracted a secret marriage with this Castor 3 years after your first husband's death, and that this union was never properly dissolved." Helena stared at the forged letter, her vision blurring with shock and rising panic. The parchment looked authentic, complete with official seals and signatures she didn't recognize. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to create this lie, and the timing, during her pregnancy, when she was most vulnerable, was cruelly calculated. "Gaior, you know this isn't true," she said, her voice breaking. "You spoke with Father Quintus, with everyone in the village. They all confirmed my status as a widow." "Yes, they did," Gaior replied, but his tone had grown distant, professional. "However, this document suggests that your alleged second marriage was kept secret, known only to a few individuals who have now come forward." Helena felt the baby shift restlessly in her womb, as if responding to her distress. Sharp pains shot through her belly, not labor pains yet, but warning signals that her body was reaching its limits of stress tolerance. "Where is this Castor now?" she demanded. "If I was supposedly married to him, surely he should be here to verify this preposterous claim." "Dead," Senator Brutus said with theatrical sadness. "Killed in a construction accident 2 years ago, according to the witnesses. Very convenient timing, one might say." "Convenient for your fabrication," Helena shot back, anger finally cutting through her shock. "Senator Brutus, you've opposed our marriage from the beginning. Now you produce mysterious documents, just as I'm about to give birth to the heir you've claimed the Empire needs." "I produce evidence that has been brought to my attention by concerned citizens," Brutus replied coldly. "Citizens who feel it's their duty to ensure the legitimacy of the imperial succession." Helena felt wetness between her legs and realized with growing panic that her body was responding to the crisis in the worst possible way. The stress was triggering early labor, exactly what Dr. Hippocrates had warned against. She pressed both hands to her belly, trying to will the child to wait, to give them time to resolve this nightmare. "I need to sit down," she gasped, and Gaior immediately moved to help her, his concern temporarily overriding his political caution. "Send for the physician," he ordered. But Helena caught his arm. "First, send for Father Quintus and Miriam. They're still here in Rome. They can testify to the truth of my status." And Gaior, she looked directly into his eyes, searching for the trust that had grown between them over these months. "You know me. You know my character. Do you truly believe I could have deceived you about something so fundamental?" For a moment, she saw uncertainty flicker across his features. The doubt that had initially shocked her was still there, but underneath it, she glimpsed the man who had chosen her, who had shared intimate conversations and dreams of their future together. "I want to believe you," he said quietly, and those words were both a lifeline and a dagger to her heart. Another contraction gripped her, stronger this time, and Helena doubled over with a cry of pain that brought instant chaos to the study. Dr. Hippocrates appeared within minutes, took one look at her condition, and immediately began issuing orders. "The Empress needs to be moved to her chambers immediately. This level of stress during late pregnancy is extremely dangerous for both mother and child." As servants rushed to prepare her rooms, Helena found herself caught between physical agony and emotional devastation. The labor pains were coming faster now, her body's response to trauma she couldn't control. But worse than the physical pain was the look in Gaior's eyes. The husband she'd come to love was viewing her as a potential fraud who might have built their entire marriage on lies. Through her haze of pain and panic, Helena heard rapid footsteps in the corridor. Father Quintus burst into the study, still wearing his traveling clothes, with old Miriam close behind. The elderly priest took one look at the scene, and his face darkened with righteous fury. "What monstrous accusation is this?" he demanded, moving immediately to Helena's side. "I performed the funeral rites for Helena's husband Marcus. I counseled her through 15 years of widowhood. There has never been any other marriage, secret or otherwise. And who is this Castor person supposed to be?" Miriam added fiercely, her baker's authority lending weight to her words. "I know every soul in Montanus, and there's never been a stonemason by that name working in our village." Senator Brutus's confident expression wavered slightly. "These good people may have been unaware of a clandestine relationship." "Nonsense!" Father Quintus cut him off. "I hear every confession in that village. I know every marriage, every birth, every death. Helena has lived as purely as any woman I've known, devoted entirely to her teaching and her students. This accusation is not just false, it's blasphemous." Helena felt another powerful contraction and cried out, clutching Gaior's hand despite everything. The baby was coming whether the political crisis was resolved or not, and she desperately needed her husband's support. "The witnesses who brought this forward," Gaior said grimly, "where are they now?" "Returning to their homes," Senator Brutus replied. "Simple people who felt duty-bound to report what they knew but have no desire to remain in Rome." "How convenient," Miriam said with withering scorn. "Anonymous accusers who disappear before they can be properly questioned. Senator, I may be just a village baker, but I recognize a carefully constructed lie when I see one." Dr. Hippocrates interrupted the heated exchange. "Your Majesty, the Empress must be moved immediately. The labor is progressing rapidly, and continued stress could be fatal for both her and the child." As they carried her to the birthing chamber, Helena caught Gaia's hand one more time. "Please," she whispered through gritted teeth, "please don't let them destroy what we've built together. Please trust what you know to be true." But as another wave of pain washed over her and the struggle to bring new life into the world consumed all her strength, Helena wasn't certain whether Gaior's trust would survive the political storm that was breaking around them. The forged letter had been timed with devastating precision, designed to plant seeds of doubt at the very moment when she was most vulnerable and least able to defend herself. Through the pain and chaos, One thought echoed in her mind. Someone wanted to destroy not just her marriage, but her child's legitimacy before it could even draw its first breath. Helena's son entered the world during the darkest hour before dawn, his first cries echoing through the palace corridors as Rome held its collective breath. The labor had been difficult and dangerous. Dr. Hippocrates later admitted he'd feared losing both mother and child, but Marcus Gaius Caesar emerged healthy and strong, with his father's determined chin and his mother's gentle eyes. Helena held her son for the first time as grey dawn light filtered through the birthing chamber windows. Her exhausted body flooded with fierce protective love. But even as she marveled at the perfect tiny fingers and the shock of dark hair that crowned his head, the shadow of Senator Brutus's accusation hung over what should have been pure joy. Gaior stood at the foot of her bed, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. She could see his love for their child warring with the political doubt that had been planted so carefully in his mind. When their eyes met, Helena saw uncertainty where once there had been trust, and her heart broke a little more. "He's beautiful," Gaior said quietly, reaching out to touch the baby's cheek with one gentle finger. "Perfect. He is your son," Helena said firmly, though her voice was hoarse from the ordeal. "Our son, conceived in love and born into legitimacy. Whatever lies Senator Brutus has spread, this child is your true heir." Gaior was quiet for a long moment, studying the baby's face as if searching for answers in those innocent features. "Helena, I need you to understand the political reality we're facing. Even if these accusations are false, they've been made public now. Half the Senate questions our marriage's validity, which means they question our son's right to succession." Helena's arms tightened protectively around little Marcus. "Then we fight the accusations with truth. Father Quintus and Miriam have testified to my widowed status. Send investigators to Montanus. Let them question everyone who knew me. The truth will vindicate us. I've already dispatched a full investigative team," Gaior replied. "But Helena, the damage may already be done. Senator Brutus has been clever. He's not claiming you're guilty, merely that questions exist that must be resolved. Even if we prove the accusations false, the suspicion may linger." Dr. Hippocrates entered the chamber carrying a tray of herbal remedies, his usually cheerful demeanor subdued by the circumstances. "Empress, you need rest and recovery. The stress of the past day has taken a significant toll on your body." "I need to clear my name," Helena said stubbornly. "Our son deserves to inherit an empire, not a cloud of suspicion." "Our son deserves a living mother more than anything else," Gaior replied with sudden sharpness, and Helena heard genuine fear in his voice. Fear that he might lose her, that the political crisis might cost him not just his marriage, but the woman he'd come to love. Over the following days, as Helena recovered from childbirth, Rome buzzed with gossip and speculation. The mysterious witnesses who had brought the accusations had indeed vanished, but their testimony had been carefully recorded by Senate clerks. The supposed marriage certificate bore seals and signatures that appeared authentic to casual inspection, though Helena knew them to be elaborate forgeries. Father Quintus refused to leave the palace, mounting a vigorous defense of Helena's character to anyone who would listen. His testimony before a special Senate committee was passionate and detailed. He recounted every conversation he'd had with Helena about her loneliness, her struggles with childlessness, her devotion to Marcus's memory. Old Miriam proved equally fierce in her loyalty, describing Helena's daily life in such precise detail that no secret relationship could possibly have escaped notice. But it was young Lucius who provided the most compelling evidence. Helena's former student had grown into an articulate young man, and his testimony about his teacher's character moved even some of Helena's critics. He spoke of her dedication, her integrity, her transparent grief for her lost husband that had colored her teaching for years after Marcus's death. "Magistra Helena was like a second mother to all of us," he declared before the Senate. "We would have known if she'd found happiness with another man. We would have rejoiced for her. There was no secret marriage, because there was no marriage at all. The investigative team returned from Montanus with testimony from dozens of villagers, all confirming Helena's story. No one had ever heard of a stonemason named Castor. The village record showed no marriages involving Helena except her original union with Marcus. Even the local magistrate, who would have been required to witness any legal ceremony, swore under oath that no such event had occurred. But Senator Brutus proved prepared for every defense. He claimed the villagers were lying to protect their famous daughter, that the records might have been altered, that simple mountain folk couldn't be trusted to remember events accurately. His faction in the Senate seized on every minor inconsistency in the testimony, magnifying doubts and sowing confusion. Helena watched the political maneuvering from her recovery chambers, nursing her son and growing stronger each day, but also growing more determined. The attack on her marriage was ultimately an attack on little Marcus's future, and she would not allow political ambition to steal her child's birthright. "I want to address the Senate myself," she announced during one of Gaior's evening visits. "Absolutely not," he replied immediately. "You've just given birth. The physician insists on at least 2 more weeks of rest. Our son's legitimacy is being debated while I hide in these chambers like a guilty woman," Helena said firmly. "I won't cower behind others' testimony when I can speak for myself. Helena, you're not a trained orator. The Senate is a hostile environment, full of men who specialize in verbal combat. They could twist your words, confuse you with legal technicalities. They could try," Helena interrupted. "But I've spent 15 years managing rooms full of skeptical farm boys and frustrated parents. I know how to speak plainly about complex subjects. I know how to make truth sound like truth instead of clever rhetoric." Gaior was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the lamplight. Helena could see him weighing political calculation against personal trust, duty against love. Finally, he reached into his robes and withdrew something she'd never seen before, his personal signet ring, bearing the imperial seal that gave weight to his most important decisions. "This ring has been passed down through 5 emperors," he said quietly. "It represents absolute authority, complete trust. I've never shared its use with anyone. Not advisors, not generals, not even my closest friends." Helena stared at the golden band, understanding instinctively that this moment would define not just their marriage, but their partnership in governing the empire. "I want you to wear it," Gaior continued. "Not as decoration, but as symbol of our complete partnership. If you address the Senate, you speak not just as my wife defending herself, but as my partner in rule. Your words carry my full authority." Helena accepted the ring with trembling hands, slipping it onto her finger beside her wedding band. The weight of it seemed enormous, not just the physical gold, but the trust it represented, the power it embodied, the responsibility it imposed. "If I do this wrong, if I fail to convince them, then we fail together," Gaior said simply. "But Helena, I've watched you for nearly a year now. I've seen you adapt to imperial life, master complex protocols, win over suspicious court officials. I've seen you stand up to senators' wives who tried to intimidate you. Most importantly, I've seen you love our son with a fierce protectiveness that tells me you'll do whatever necessary to secure his future." Helena looked down at little Marcus sleeping in his ornate cradle, wrapped in the village women's embroidered blanket. The contrast between the humble mountain wool and the imperial gold surrounding him seemed to embody everything she represented, bridge between common experience and uncommon responsibility. "When?" she asked. 3 days from now. The Senate will convene to hear final arguments before voting on a formal investigation. It's your chance to speak directly to the men who will decide our family's fate." Helena nodded, feeling determination crystallize in her chest like cooling metal taking final shape. Senator Brutus had chosen the wrong woman to target with forged documents and political theater. He'd underestimated the strength that came from genuine love, from clear conscience, from a mother's fierce protection of her child. "I'll need to prepare carefully," she said. I want to know everything about each senator who will be present, their backgrounds, their motivations, their families. If I'm going to speak truth to power, I need to understand the power I'm addressing. General Aurelius can provide detailed intelligence on each member. Dr. Hippocrates can advise on managing your physical recovery during a stressful appearance. And Helena, Gaior leaned forward, his hand covering both hers and the ring that now bound them in complete partnership. I believe in you. Whatever doubts I may have harbored, whatever political pressures I've felt, I believe in your integrity, your strength, and your love for our family. Helena felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of determination rather than despair. The battle for her son's future was about to begin, and she would meet it armed with truth, love, and the full authority of imperial power. The Senate chamber had never seen anything quite like Helena's entrance. Traditionally, women appeared before the august body only as silent witnesses or accusers in legal proceedings, carefully coached by male relatives and expected to speak minimally. But Helena walked into the marble hall, wearing the deep purple of imperial authority, Gaior's signet ring gleaming on her finger, carrying herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to hide and everything to defend. The assembled senators, nearly 300 men representing the most powerful families in the empire, fell, silent as she took her place at the speaker's podium. Helena could feel their collective scrutiny like a physical weight, searching for signs of the humble village teacher beneath her imperial robes, looking for weakness they could exploit or uncertainty they could magnify. Senator Brutus sat in the front row, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes bright with anticipation. He'd spent weeks orchestrating this moment, gathering allies who questioned Helena's fitness for imperial marriage, preparing arguments that would make her guilt seem probable even if not proven. His daughter Claudia sat in the gallery reserved for senators' families, her face a mirror of her father's calculating coldness. Helena placed her prepared notes on the podium, but didn't look at them. Instead, she let her gaze move slowly across the chamber, meeting eyes, acknowledging the gravity of the moment, allowing the silence to build until even the most hardened politician felt compelled to listen. "Honored senators," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "I stand before you not as a defendant pleading innocence, but as a Roman citizen demanding justice. For myself, for my husband, and most importantly, for my infant son, whose legitimacy has been called into question by accusations I will now address directly." She paused, letting the firmness of her tone establish the framework for what would follow. This would not be a desperate woman begging for mercy, but a partner in imperial authority demanding accountability from those who would challenge her family's honor. Senator Brutus has presented documents claiming, "I contracted a secret marriage during my widowhood in Montanus. These documents bear official seals and witness signatures that appear authentic to casual inspection. Let me be absolutely clear. These documents are elaborate forgeries created by someone with significant resources and detailed knowledge of bureaucratic procedures." A murmur ran through the chamber. Helena had expected to spend precious time establishing her credibility, but instead she was making direct accusations of fraud. Several senators leaned forward, intrigued by her boldness. The supposed bridegroom, a stonemason named Castor, is conveniently dead and cannot testify. The witnesses who brought these accusations forward have mysteriously vanished from Rome, leaving behind only carefully scripted testimony that cannot be challenged or verified. The timing of these revelations, during my pregnancy, when I was most vulnerable and least able to mount an effective defense, speaks to careful calculation rather than spontaneous civic duty. Helena moved away from the podium, walking closer to the seated senators, making the formal proceeding feel more like the intimate discussions she'd mastered in her village classroom. But let us examine not just the convenient circumstances of these accusations, but their fundamental implausibility. I lived in Montanus for 15 years after my first husband's death. Every aspect of my life was visible to my neighbors. I taught their children, shared their meals, participated in their festivals, mourned their losses, and celebrated their joys. The idea that I could have contracted and maintained a secret marriage in such a close-knit community defies basic understanding of rural life. Senator Marcus Cato, an elderly man known for his respect for traditional Roman virtues, nodded slightly. Helena noted the gesture and directed her next comments toward the group of older senators who valued stability and moral authority. More than 50 witnesses from my village have testified under oath to my widowed status during the entire period in question. These include the priest who heard my confessions, the baker who shared my daily bread, the students who spent hours in my home, the families who entrusted their children to my care. Are we to believe they all participated in an elaborate deception? That simple mountain folk conspired to hide a marriage that would have been cause for celebration rather than concealment. She returned to the podium, placing her hand on the imperial seal ring that symbolized her authority to speak for the empire itself. I have lived my entire adult life as an open book, senators. My sorrows, my hopes, my daily struggles, all were shared with my community because that is how genuine people live genuine lives. Secret marriages are the province of those who have something to hide, not of village teachers who find their greatest joy in nurturing other people's children. Helena could see she was winning over some of the undecided senators, but Senator Brutus remained confident, prepared for her denial, and ready to respond with carefully prepared counter-arguments. The real battle was just beginning, but evidence and logic aside, Helena continued, her voice growing stronger, there is one question this body must answer. Who benefits from these accusations? Who gains if my marriage is invalidated, my son declared illegitimate, and the succession thrown into chaos? She turned to face Senator Brutus directly, and the chamber fell absolutely silent. That question, honored senators, leads us to the heart of this matter. Helena's direct challenge to Senator Brutus sent a ripple of tension through the chamber. Several senators shifted uncomfortably in their seats, suddenly aware that they were witnessing not just a defense against accusations, but a counterattack that might expose uncomfortable truths about their own political maneuvering. Senator Brutus, Helena continued, her voice steady and clear, your opposition to my marriage has been vocal and consistent from the moment it was announced. You have publicly questioned whether someone of my background could understand imperial responsibilities. You have suggested that our potential children might be unsuited for rule due to their maternal heritage. These are matters of legitimate political discourse, and I respect your right to hold such opinions. She paused, allowing Brutus to relax slightly before delivering the blow that would expose his deeper motivations. However, what troubles me, and what should trouble this entire body, is the revelation that you approached Father Quintus months before these accusations surfaced, seeking what you called useful information about my past. A village priest, a man of unimpeachable integrity, has testified that you offered substantial payment for any evidence that might cast doubt on my character or eligibility for marriage. The chamber erupted in surprised murmurs. Several senators turned to stare at Brutus, whose carefully composed expression finally cracked to reveal genuine alarm. Helena pressed her advantage, producing a document from her robes. This is Father Quintus's sworn testimony, bearing his ecclesiastical seal and witnessed by 3 Roman citizens. In it, he describes your visit to Montanus, your questions about my personal life, and your disappointment when he could provide no ammunition for your political purposes. When honest inquiry failed to produce the scandals you sought, Senator Brutus, did you perhaps decide that manufactured evidence would serve just as well? Senator Brutus rose from his seat, his face flushed with anger. These are serious accusations, Empress. I demand the right to respond to this testimony. Of course, Helena replied calmly. Truth benefits from open examination. But first, let me address the broader question of who benefits from discrediting my marriage and my son's legitimacy. She moved to a large map of the Roman territories that had been prepared at her request. The same type of strategic display used in military planning. Helena had studied this map for hours, not to plan battles, but to understand the political landscape that shaped senators' loyalties and ambitions. The Roman Empire stands at a crossroads, senators. Our borders are secure, our people prosperous, our treasury full. We have achieved the stability that allows us to focus on internal development rather than external conquest. But this peace depends on clear succession, on the confidence that imperial authority will transfer smoothly to the next generation. Helena traced borders on the map with her finger, highlighting regions where senators' families held significant interests. Some among you have invested heavily in military contracts, in border fortifications, in the profitable machinery of constant conflict. Others have built wealth through careful agricultural development, trade relationships, and the infrastructure of peace. These different interests create different perspectives on what direction the empire should take. She turned back to face the assembled senators, her meaning clear without being explicitly stated. Senator Brutus represents those who believe the empire is best served by traditional approaches, marriages that cement political alliances, policies that favor established interests, leadership that maintains existing power structures. There is honor in this position, even if I respectfully disagree with it. However, Helena continued, her voice growing stronger, when political disagreement becomes personal destruction, when the tools of governance are weaponized against individual families, we cross a line that threatens the very stability Senator Brutus claims to protect. She reached into her robes again and produced another document, this one bearing multiple seals and signatures. This is the final report from our investigators in Montanus. It confirms every detail of my testimony and reveals several additional facts. Most importantly, it identifies the source of the forged marriage certificate. The chamber fell absolutely silent. Even Senator Brutus seemed to stop breathing as Helena held the document aloft. The parchment bears a watermark traced to a specific workshop in Rome, a workshop that has received substantial payments from an account controlled by Senator Brutus's household steward. The notary's seal was stolen from the archives 3 months ago, during a break-in that was reported to the urban prefect but never solved. The handwriting on the witness signatures matches samples from 2 scribes, who were employed temporarily by Senator Brutus's staff and dismissed shortly after the accusations were made. Public, Helena set the report on the podium with deliberate care. Senators, this is not political opposition. This is criminal fraud designed to undermine imperial succession and destabilize the government we all swore to serve. Senator Brutus stood again, but this time his voice lacked its previous confidence. These allegations are proven beyond reasonable doubt, Helena interrupted firmly. But more than that, they demonstrate the lengths to which some will go to prevent change, to block progress, to maintain power at any cost, even the cost of imperial stability itself. She walked to the center of the chamber, surrounded by the most powerful men in the known world, and spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had finally found her true calling. I am not the enemy of Roman tradition, senators. I am its evolution. 2 years had passed since Helena's triumph in the Senate, and the empire had never been more prosperous. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the imperial family's private chambers, where a scene of domestic contentment played out that would soon be immortalized in marble and bronze. For future generations to admire, Helena sat in her favorite chair, a simple wooden seat she'd insisted on keeping despite offers of more elaborate furnishings, with 18-month-old Julia nursing contentedly at her breast. At her feet, 3-year-old Marcus practiced his letters on a wax tablet, his tongue poking out in concentration as he traced the characters his mother had taught him. Gaior lounged nearby, officially reviewing tax reports, but actually watching his family with the satisfied expression of a man who had found unexpected happiness in middle age. The commissioned family portrait leaned against the far wall, recently completed by Rome's finest artist. It showed Helena in imperial purple, but seated in her teaching posture with young Marcus beside her, one hand on a scroll while the other cradled baby Julia. Gaior stood behind them, his hand resting protectively on Helena's shoulder, his expression reflecting the partnership that had transformed not just their marriage, but their approach to governing the empire. The artist captured something beautiful, Helena murmured, glancing at the painting between Marcus's reading exercises. We look like a real family, not political figures playing roles. We are a real family, Gaior replied, setting aside his reports to join them on the floor. And the empire is stronger because of it. The changes Helena had initiated were visible throughout the palace and beyond. Her educational reforms had spread to every province, establishing schools that welcomed both boys and girls, funded by imperial resources but managed by local communities. The literacy rate among common citizens had already begun to rise, and with it, economic opportunities that benefited entire regions. Young Lucius arrived for his weekly report on the educational program's progress. Now 22, and bearing the title of Imperial Education Administrator, Helena's former student had grown into a confident young man whose mountain upbringing served him well in navigating both palace politics and provincial challenges. The northern provinces report excellent enrollment in the new schools, he announced, settling cross-legged on the floor beside Marcus, who immediately showed off his writing progress. The Germanic tribal leaders have requested permission to send their children to the border schools as well. Helena smiled, remembering the negotiations that had achieved peace through understanding rather than conquest. Her suggestion to include tribal women in diplomatic discussions had initially scandalized traditional military advisors, but the results spoke for themselves. 2 years of peaceful coexistence had proven more beneficial than decades of costly border warfare. Speaking of the Germanic territories, Gaior said, producing a letter bearing foreign seals, we've received another proposal for expanded trade agreements. It seems our policy of treating former enemies as potential partners continues to yield unexpected benefits. Helena shifted Julia to her shoulder for burping, a gesture so natural and unmistakably maternal that visiting dignitaries often forgot they were watching an empress perform imperial duties. This blend of personal warmth and political authority had become her signature approach to governance, and it was proving remarkably effective. Old Miriam and Father Quintus had become permanent residents of a palace guest wing, their presence providing Helena with the emotional anchoring she needed to maintain her perspective amid imperial complexities. The elderly baker now supervised the palace kitchens with cheerful tyranny, ensuring that even state dinners reflected her philosophy that good food brought people together more effectively than formal protocols. Father Quintus had been appointed as imperial chaplain, a position that allowed him to provide spiritual guidance not just to the royal family, but to the growing community of servants, guards and administrators who had come to see the palace as an unusually harmonious workplace. His mountain wisdom and practical theology had proven surprisingly popular among sophisticated Roman courtiers who discovered that simple truths often carried more weight than elaborate philosophical arguments. Senator Brutus had been quietly exiled to a distant province after his conspiracy was fully exposed. His political faction dissolved as its members distanced themselves from his criminal methods. But rather than celebrating his downfall, Helena had pushed for policies that addressed the legitimate concerns his opposition had represented. Conservative senators found themselves consulted on traditional protocols, their expertise valued even when their political preferences were not adopted. "I've been thinking about our next child," Helena said during dinner that evening, watching Marcus attempt to feed himself with a spoon while Julia napped in her cradle nearby. "Our next child." Gaior raised an eyebrow, though his smile suggested the idea was not unwelcome. "I'm pregnant again," Helena announced simply. "Dr. Hippocrates confirmed it yesterday. due in late autumn, he believes. Gaior's joy was immediate and complete, the same pure happiness that had greeted news of both previous pregnancies. But this time, there was no shadow of political uncertainty, no fear of accusations or challenges to legitimacy. Their family was secure, their love proven, their partnership unshakable. Later that night, as they walked in the palace gardens, where Helena's mountain seeds had grown into a beautiful blend of Roman grandeur and rustic charm, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. Cherry blossoms from her village now bloomed alongside imperial roses, their delicate petals drifting in the evening breeze like blessings from her past life. "Do you ever regret the path that brought us together?" Gaior asked, following her gaze to the cherry trees that had become her favorite spot for private contemplation. "Never," Helena replied without hesitation. "I spent 20 years believing my chance for love and family had passed, that my purpose was limited to the small good I could do in one mountain village. But sometimes the impossible becomes possible precisely when we've stopped expecting it." She touched her still flat belly, where their third child grew, thinking of the legacy they were building together, not just through their own children, but through the millions of young minds now receiving education. The peaceful relationships replacing ancient conflicts, the more humane policies that put people before politics. "Our children will inherit an empire," she continued. "But more than that, they'll inherit the understanding that true power comes from service, that real strength grows from compassion, and that the greatest victories are won through bringing out the best in others rather than defeating them." Gaior pulled her close, and they stood together in their garden paradise, surrounded by the evidence of dreams that had seemed impossible but had somehow, against all odds, bloomed into reality.